to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show. If you're new here and you like my content, give it a like and subscribe and share with your family and friends. Before we move forward, I'd like to take a moment and recognize the 6 service members who died in the war with Iran so far. And obviously there will be many more, but let's start with the 6 that unfortunately passed away. There's Captain Cody Cork, who is age 35, Sergeant Noah Tetchins, 42, Sergeant Nicole Amore, 39, Sergeant Declan Coati, 20, who was posthumously promoted from specialist. There was Major Jeffrey R. O'Brien, 45, and Chief Warrant Officer 3, Robert M. Marzon, age 54. And this is a sobering reminder that while all give some give their all, so may they rest in peace. We will, as I said, start with the war in Iran. I'm not going to cover the individual strikes or what we have targeted or what Iran has targeted. That's not really my interest. I want to focus on the larger implications of the war and how that may affect you here at home. So the biggest issue that we are facing is a rise in energy prices. Global oil prices are decided on a global market, have risen by more than, I believe it's about 20%. And we are now north of $90 a barrel, 93 as of this recording. Not 100 as I feared, but we are getting closer and closer to $100 a barrel, and indeed there is some whispers about $150 a barrel. The Strait of Hormuz remains blocked, and Iran has threatened to shoot any ships that travel through. Iran claims it hit the USS Abraham Lincoln, apparently trying to assassinate Lincoln a second time. It doesn't look like that is true. Meanwhile, Iran also fired a missile at Turkey, and Turkey is a member of NATO. And the missile did not land, it was intercepted. But if you know anything about international politics, NATO considers an attack on one member to be an attack on every member. And there are no plans to trigger Article 5, which would trigger a wider war, but they are boosting missile defenses in preparation for a wider war. NATO Article 5 has only been triggered once, and that was after September 11th. Even if this war does end quickly, which I don't think it will, and nobody seems to think it will, the oil production in the Gulf states has been shut down, and it will take quite some time to reopen it. If you remember during COVID, it took years to get back to pre-pandemic production levels. I don't think we got there until 2023. There's no doubt, this will no doubt be a squeeze on economies in the Middle East, which could lead to refugee crises in Europe, especially if there's a civil war in Iran. If you think about civil wars in Syria, there's way more people that live in Iran than in Syria. And the Syrian refugee crisis caused problems all over the world. Of course, our only saving grace at the moment is that oil markets have been well stocked for the last year. The world has been producing more oil than it actually needs, which has put downward pressure on oil prices in recent months. We know this because you can look back at last year at the Energy Information Administration, which is the American, they survey, they make predictions about the oil market. They're an American government agency, and they predicted that we would be in an oil glut in the years ahead. So if this war had happened 2 to 3 years ago, we would have been in a much more difficult situation. So as I feared, it looks like the war will not end anytime soon. And I'll say this, and I'm recording this on Saturday, and things change rapidly. I'm not available, wasn't able to record on Sunday, so things may have changed by the time you listen to this. So let me kind of explain what we do know. President Trump wants regime change without boots on the ground. And that would be good, but it is going to be complex. However, I think this war is a huge problem. So let's run through some of the things. Number one, they said that Iran was planning on an attack. There is no evidence for this. Iran's nuclear capabilities were obliterated just a year ago, according to our own president. They said that there was an attack on the USS Cole. This was 25 years ago, and it was before I was even born, and before probably many of you were even born. And that was not done by Iran, that was done by Al-Qaeda. And lastly, President Bush spent the better part of a year trying to convince the American public and Congress that we needed to attack Iran. None of that was done here. And as I will get to in a moment, that there's none of that political preparation to get there. The timing does sort of make sense. Iran has been isolated both domestically and internationally. It's a pariah state. They have no regional allies except Russia. Even their last major ally was Bashar al-Assad, that was in Syria, and he fell in 2024. The 86-year-old Ayatollah, he was going to die anyway, so I don't know if killing him is a huge accomplishment. He's going to die soon anyway. It was rumored he had he had major health issues. Killing him only sped up the decline. And I believe, as with Venezuela, this is about oil. Trump only does anything for one of two reasons, either immigration or oil. And this is about immigration. In fact, it would make it worse. This is about oil. So Trump wants a pro-America regime so he can get oil revenue. That's kind of what I believe, which is the same reason we really invaded Iraq in 2003. And I would be fine with that, but he has to be honest about his intentions. So when will this end? The president said it could be weeks. On Thursday, he said we are ahead of schedule, whatever that means, and we are moving to the next phase, whatever the next phase is. The only thing we could do is really knock out more leaders. And apparently Iran has lost all of their internet. The internet traffic went from like 98% to 1%. So nearly the entire internet is blacked out, so even if Trump makes some sort of call, he did make a call to the Iranian people, oh, you need to rise up, they're not going to see it, there's no internet. We really don't, if we do want the country to not fall into civil war and we want a pro-American regime, we really don't want to bomb the country back to the Stone Age. Especially if the plan is to rebuild it and we don't want to turn it into Afghanistan 2.0. President Trump also claimed that Iran was trying to make a deal, and I suspected it was a bit late for that, and indeed it was. Trump said he would accept nothing but unconditional surrender. Here at home, and honestly, this is not even worth mentioning, the House and Senate both failed to curb the president's war powers, which means almost all Republicans are now on record. By the way, there were a few Democrats as well that are on record for supporting the president's war operations. As with every president since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Trump did not seek a declaration of war. So let's keep that in mind. So connecting to the title, is this 2003 all over again? Well, there are some similarities, but there are key differences as well. In the lead up to the invasion of Iraq, which began in March of 2003, almost 23 years ago, the Bush administration laid the groundwork politically for the invasion. They talked in front of cameras, the media, they went to the UN, they held summits with other world leaders, and they got some international backing, although it was limited. None of that happened here. And it's not surprising because that's not how Trump operates. Bush saw his approval rating spike after the invasion of Iraq. It was already on the decline. It didn't last very long, but he did see a spike, and I do not expect the same thing to happen here. If there is, it will be a very tiny bump, even then I don't think it's going to happen. Trump did not lay the groundwork, so he's not going to see a boost in his approval rating. In fact, I think it's going to make it even worse, just like it did for Bush. So on the surface and to casual observers, it may seem like we are back in 2003, but we are not. The politics is so much different than it was even 20 years ago. And I think we as a nation, we are much less tolerant of regime change wars than we were even just 20 years ago. And let me remind you, everybody, of the Republican Party's 2024 platform. This was the platform that President Trump ran on and the platform that Republicans as a whole ran on, and they wrote. It stated, it's linked, the whole platform is linked below if you want to see it. It stated, restore peace through strength. War breeds inflation while global stability brings price stability. Republicans will end the global chaos and restore peace through strength, reducing geopolitical risks and lowering commodity prices. Clearly that's not happening. Anyway, in other news, we have learned that Kristi Noem has been fired as Homeland Security Secretary. The reason for firing her doesn't seem to be very clear, at least not according to President Trump's reasoning. It was reported in Politico that he had asked lawmakers on Capitol Hill for their opinion. He reportedly wants Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin to replace him, and we don't know that much, but I do believe that Noem had turned the job of DHS Secretary into a publicity PR firm for her own political purposes, potentially as a bid for president someday in the future, maybe. And I really think that the administration's policies, they were not a failure of policy, it was a failure of PR. And I think had they not been so bombastic in their approach, they might have actually retained the support of the American people. So Noem, for example, Noem was bragging about how she was deporting people, which obviously created problems, and that led to the deaths of Alex Priddy and Renee Good, which everyone forgot about because of the war. We'll have to see if that's really all I have for right now. Markwayne Mullin, it's not clear what he would do with the role, and as I'll get to in a moment, Democrats are not really going to accept this. So say that Markwayne Mullin, if he gets confirmed, I believe he will be, Then there's going to be a vacancy in the Senate for the U.S. Senate seat in Oklahoma, and I'm assuming Markwayne Mullin, the Democrats are probably not going to challenge the seat. Oklahoma is a ruby red Republican state. In the last presidential election, not a single county, not even the cities in Oklahoma, voted for the Democrats. So there is going to have to be an opening. That would be another seat Republicans would have to spend at least a little bit of energy into. So they're probably wary about that, but they're probably not too wary. So we will get to the government shutdown because she was the DHS secretary, and DHS is at the heart of the government shutdown, so we're going to get to that in a little bit. We do have elections in Texas that were last week, and I don't have a whole lot to say here because in some ways we know more than we did a week ago, but in some ways we know less than, well, not less, we know nothing more than we did a week ago. So, for example, in the Democratic primary, State Representative James Tallarico, she beat U.S. Representative Jasmine Crockett for the Senate seat. And Tallarico is the more electable one, although not by a whole lot. Polling didn't really, it was a very limited difference, 1, maybe 2%, which can be a big deal in a tight race, but it's not like their Democrats' chances have risen of taking the seat dramatically. It would really depend, as we'll get to in a moment, on the Republican side. Turnout in the primary, though, this is very good news for Democrats, was way off the charts. It was the highest recorded turnout in Texas Democratic history. Tallarico's victory was powered by Hispanic voters, particularly in his home base in Austin, as well as along the U.S.-Mexico border. Jasmine Crockett, she got pretty close as well. I mean, she got 45% of the vote. If you think that's pretty close, Tallarico got just over 52. Her base was in Dallas and in the eastern portion of the state. And Tallarico will need to win a lot of those voters back, and I don't see why he necessarily wouldn't. It was a little bit of a dirty campaign, not too dirty, at least not compared to the Republicans. So he will need to unite the Democratic base, and then he will need to peel off moderate and independent voters from the Republican nominee. And I say Republican nominee and not a specific candidate because we don't know who the Republican nominee is going to be. So we have very little new information with the Republican nominee. The great Cornyn v. Paxton battle has not yet been solved, and as we know, we do know that Cornyn has narrowly, quote unquote, beat Paxton. He got 41.9% of the vote, and Paxton got 40.7% of the vote. So it was a 1.2% difference, which was roughly, I think it was like 20 or 30,000 votes. And Wesley Hunt, he was in distant third place. He had no chance of winning. So he isn't moving forward. The runoff will be on May 26 if no candidate drops out, as I'll explain in a moment. The big thing we are waiting for right now is Trump's endorsement. And as of this recording, he has not made an endorsement. And it is highly believed that whoever gets Trump's endorsement will win the primary, and then they will move on to the general election. And I believe Trump will endorse Paxton. Paxton is more ideologically aligned with Trump. Remember, Cornyn voted with the Biden administration on many of his nominees. It was over a dozen of them. And he also voted for red flag laws, which were deeply unpopular with the Republican base. And you think the gun issue is a big issue in a Republican state like Texas, or in a gun state like Texas. And then Trump in 2023 even wrote that Cornyn was as bad of a senator as Mitt Romney, and Trump hates Mitt Romney. And Mitt Romney also voted to convict Trump and throw him out of office twice. So he put Cornyn on the same level playing field as a man who tried to get rid of Trump and vote him out of office twice in both of his impeachments. I don't see how he could possibly endorse Cornyn, at least not from a practical or ideological standpoint. And the only thing that gives me pause in what I think is going to happen is that Paxton is much less likely to win the general election than Cornyn. If Cornyn wins the primary, the seat will probably stay with the Republicans. Republicans are going to have to throw a lot of money and energy into the seat, but if Paxton wins, then Democrats might actually gain the seat. And I'm starting to think, considering how weak Cornyn is, he's never been weaker. Cornyn might still lose the general election. So Republicans might have just thrown the seat away. So, and I think Trump, in his heart, he wants, if you believe he has one, that he wants to endorse Paxton because they're more ideologically aligned. But he's afraid of losing the seat because if he endorses somebody and then they lose, then that's on him. And I think if Crockett had won, then Trump wouldn't have been so hesitant to endorse Paxton because Crockett probably wouldn't have won no matter who the Republican nominee was. And Cornyn has never been weaker, as I said earlier. He has been in judicial or federal politics since the Reagan administration, and he only got 40% of the vote from his own party. And that's pretty pathetic considering Republicans gave him $70 million, and they threw a crap ton of money at this race. So I think Trump will endorse Paxton. Of course, I could be proven wrong. I probably will be. You never know. Maybe before this video even comes out, but that's what I'm thinking. And if he does endorse Cornyn, or whoever he endorses, if he endorses it before the next episode, I will put that in the description. Trump wants whoever he doesn't endorse, he's really dragging this out, to drop out of the race, as I said, if there is a primary. Paxton has said he will not. He will consider it, which that doesn't mean anything, if the Senate passes the Save America Act. For good measure in the primary, Representative Dan Crenshaw, the neocon, he was defeated in his bid for renomination. He's the one with the eye patch. And Representative Tony Gonzalez, he did advance to a runoff. And this is the guy I talked about, I think it was last week or the week before, the one who had an affair and then with a campaign staffer, and then she committed suicide. So he advanced to the runoff, and then he dropped out of the race. So the bad news is he will remain in Congress until the term is over, but that is where things are. At least he won't be in Congress in 9 or 10 months. This is important news for the future of the American economy. President Trump has formally nominated Kevin Warsh to be the Federal Reserve Chair to replace Jerome Powell, whose term ends in May of this year. If you don't know, the Federal Reserve controls interest rates, and the chair doesn't have power, like they can't unilaterally raise interest rates, but they do have like their own mandate, and they lead the committee. So their formal power is 1 of 12 votes, but they do have more quote-unquote soft power. And Trump obviously wants lower rates. Powell has been reluctant to do it because he's worried about inflation rising. Very valid concern. But once again, the Federal Reserve Chair does not really control interest rates. That's decided by the whole board. And before I go on, we know with the war in Iran, this could make the whole thing worse because we knew this could be a problem. But the Fed this year is caught between a weakening economy on one side and then stagflation on the other. For now, wages are still rising higher than inflation, but not by a whole lot. And with oil prices rising, the risk of inflation going up has also risen. So the Fed will have to make a choice. Do they stimulate growth by cutting rates, risking higher inflation in the short term? Or do they hike rates, accept unemployment will rise, has already been rising, in order to keep inflation low? Or are they going to do nothing, as I think they will do? Considering in future inflation might come from an oil supply shock, raising rates is probably not going to be that effective because it's a supply issue, not a demand issue. So in just 3 months, this will be up to Warsh to decide. His term, if he's confirmed on time, he should be in the post by May 15th. So I'll give my thoughts on Warsh himself, and then I'll explain the roadblock he faces toward confirmation. So there's some good things. He believes in its central bank independence. If you aren't in the know, that basically means the idea that the central bank should be separate from political process and operate independently of election cycles. He's got a lot of experience. He was on the Federal Board of Governors during the Great Recession in 2008. So he has the experience. But on the bad side, there has been some rhetoric recently about how the Federal Reserve needs to change. Very Doge-like rhetoric. We got to cut the dead wood. He's spoken against low interest rates before, which is what Trump wants, so he could have the presidency here. He's changed more recently, so I kind of wonder, did he actually change, or is he doing this just to get the nomination? And I tend to agree with Warsh's old positions, where low interest rates are bad. He used to think that low interest rates were bad. Now he thinks they're good. And as we saw during the pandemic, rates were way too low for way too long, and that's something I knew before it even came. It's easy for people to be like, oh, we should have raised rates, but I knew at the time rates needed to go up. And since he's changed recently, I don't really trust him, and I hope he's not confirmed, but considering the makeup of the Senate, I expect him to be. So does this guy have integrity? I don't know, and when I don't know, I tend to go with no. There is a wrinkle here that makes this very interesting, and this is why I bring the whole thing up. Republican Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina, he is blocking the appointment from being considered. Now, how is he doing this? You might think he's just one guy. Well, he is on the Senate Banking Committee, and right now the membership has 11 Democrats and 13 Republicans. And if he voted with the Democrats, the advancing Warsh to the full Senate would fail 12-12, which means he wouldn't be able to be considered until Tillis changes his mind. And that's exactly what Tillis is going to do. Not because Warsh is unqualified. Now, while a lot of people like me, they will say, well, we probably shouldn't have Warsh because he could be politically swayed in certain ways, or there might be some people who think he's unqualified. As I said, I don't think that's really a great answer, like a great reason not to. But his answer is that he wrote, Kevin Warsh is a qualified nominee with a deep understanding of monetary policy, and he said his concern is that the Justice Department has been investigating Powell, the current chair, and Tillis wants that done and over with before he will confirm. So potentially Tillis could drag this thing out for months and months and months. All right, and then this is the last topic we'll talk about. I promised we would talk about the government shutdown. We will end with it. It has nearly a month now, and it began on February 14th, and today it will be the 9th when this comes out, so it will be almost a month. And don't forget that it could go on much, much longer. This time only one government department is affected, and that's the Homeland Security. The administration has increased pressure on Democrats by reducing non-emergency recovery work, ending courtesy air escorts for lawmakers, and ending the global entry program for international travelers, whatever that means, and threatening to do the same with the TSA pre-check. And they technically did this for a few hours, but they had a huge amount of backlash from the public, so they had to reinstate it. So they might do it again. We'll see. I don't think they will. That'd be risky. Air traffic controllers. The thing that could kill this is that air traffic controllers might stop showing up to work. They're not being paid. Most people, they don't get paid. They're not going to work. And that's what might happen. And that would cost airports, airlines, the economy a whole lot of money. And this comes as jet fuel prices are rising because of the war in Iran. So airlines are going to be squeezed from both ends. They're going to have higher costs, and then they're going to have less people coming in because of both the higher costs and also the fewer air traffic controllers. As for the politics of it, Democrats are not happy about any of the things I mentioned, but they are the ones that shut down the government, so it is on them. And this shutdown is completely pointless in my opinion because ICE will keep operating. They're only doing it to try to pressure the administration to change. And the administration has very little, as I said a month ago, they have very little reasoning to compromise here. And betting markets seem to think that this shutdown could last more than a month or even 2, and I think some said it could last 3 or more. And the record right now is 43 days, so that's the one to beat, and we will be there in about 3 weeks. There was a vote on Wednesday. It failed, and that's because the politics of the shutdown has not changed. Democrats are demanding removing things like masks from ICE agents, tightening warrant requirements, ending roving patrols, things that Republicans will not accept. The termination of Kristi Noem is not going to affect the Democrats' position here because, as far as they're concerned, rotating the people around but not changing the policy is insufficient. And that's exactly what Hakeem Jeffries, the House Democratic leader, said. He said a change in personnel is not sufficient. We need a change in policy. Democrats are sure happy she's gone, but that won't change anything, and Democrats want ICE, according to them, to treat people like every other law enforcement does. And as I said before on the show, if that's the case, then leftist militant groups need to stop treating ICE like it's the modern-day Gestapo. So that's all for now. And a note for you fans of mine, I don't know if I really have any fans out there, but if you are a fan of mine, and I know there aren't many out there, if you're interested in buying my book, I released it back in August. I released 2 books, but I'm talking about my memoir in particular. I recommend you wait until March 19th, and that is when the second edition comes out. The first edition will be permanently taken down, and only the second will be available, but everything in the first edition is in the second edition, so you won't be missing anything. If you've already bought the first one, don't buy the next one unless you really want to. It's not, as I said, not really necessary. It's just an update, and it completes the story. So that is the update. It will be available March 19th, and I will put that in the link of the next episode's description. And I'll give you a reminder at the start of next episode as well. So thank you for tuning in as always, and I hope to see you next week. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Bye-bye.